Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So today I'm doing a follow-up to a really old video, 2016 or 2017. I made a video called Debunking Common Writing Tips, which is the most viewed video on my channel. If you're watching this video, it's very likely either directly or indirectly because of that video. That video is almost single-handedly responsible for the growth of this channel. It's been many years and I wanted to make a follow-up and talk about 10 more writing tips or writing opinions that I don't agree with. Even though I talk a lot about like advice that I don't agree with, it's not because I want to be a hater. There are a lot of writing tips and advice that I love, but I do think it's important to talk about writing advice that might be toxic or might be portrayed as like universal when for a lot of people it just doesn't work. Everyone has their own unique process and there's no reason to judge how someone else writes their book. So the first piece of advice or common idea is that writers should push themselves to write every day even when they don't feel like writing. And the idea here with this piece of advice is that, you know, if you don't feel like writing one day, you're not going to notice a difference in quality, you just have to force yourself to do it. And while this may be good advice for some people, and I'm not saying that this is universally bad because it certainly does work for some people, I think stating this as like a universal thing is really misleading because it just doesn't apply to a lot of writers. Not writing on days where you don't feel like it or where you feel kind of just off your game is literally totally fine, and for a lot of writers there is a notable difference in quality. When I think about my novel, there are scenes that I wrote on those days where I was just really, my brain was on, the writing was flowing, and those scenes are still the best scenes in the book. And there were scenes that I wrote on days where I was just tired and I didn't feel like writing, and they took drafts, months, maybe years to touch up, rework, and get in place. Lots of writers don't really notice a difference on a good day versus a bad day. It kind of all turns out the same to them. Other people notice a huge difference. I also find that if I push myself to write on those days where I just don't feel like it, that is a surefire way to get burned out. Pushing yourself to write when you don't feel like it can in some cases definitely lead to good writing, and for some writers it can definitely lead to good writing. Doing it against your instincts can lead to burnout, and so I just don't agree with this as like a tough love kind of thing. You know, I feel like it's usually a tough love kind of thing. It's like, oh well, you don't feel like it, but you better just write. And it's like, you don't have to bully yourself into writing. It can just be about having fun and writing what you want to write when you want to write it. It doesn't have to be like the grind, capitalism all of the time. You can just hang out and have fun and write what you want, when you feel like it. And when you don't feel like writing, you don't have to. The next piece of writing advice that I just don't jive with is treat writing like a job. But what if it's not your job though? I aspire to be a published author. I can tell you that I sure don't write 40 hours a week, and I probably never will. Even if I was a full-time author, I don't think I'd be able to write 40 hours a week. Some people can do it. I certainly couldn't. And it sucks to see people kill their passion for writing because they feel like they're only a valid writer if they push themselves to treat writing like a job when it's not their job. And the logic I often see is, well, one day when it is your job, you're gonna have to treat it like a job. Okay, but what if it's not your job yet? Like, you're not at that stage of life, you know? I remember this when I was in high school. Teachers would always be like, well, I gotta make this really hard because it's not gonna be this easy in university. And it's like, okay, but I'm not in university yet. I'm 15, so why are you saying you have to give me the workload of a 21-year-old so that I'll be ready when I'm 21? Like, when it's your job, then you should treat it like a job. But I think it's so sad to see people feel like the only way to be a valid or good writer is if they treat it like a job. It can just be for fun, it can just be a hobby. Even if your eventual goal is for this to be your job, if it's not now, you don't have to treat it like a job. Even when I was a teenager, I would be like, yeah, I treat writing like a job. And I felt like the only way that I was like a valid writer was if I treated writing like a job, which is so sad. Not everything has to be monetized. Not everything needs the goal to be monetized. The next tip that I don't agree with is a really common one, and it's don't write multiple projects at once. This is one of those things that like a lot of people advise against because yeah, it can be hard. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't work for some people, and I don't understand why you know, we should be advising things in general like they're the rule for how to write because it's what applies to some people. Yes, some people can't write multiple projects at once or don't want to. For other people, it is actually like the best way for them to write. For someone like me, I have a really short creative attention span. I'm really frenetic and my creativity spikes and drops a lot. It's not stable or constant. It's like up and down. You know, I get a burst of inspiration and a lot of energy to write, and then it dips a bit. And those dips usually are about 2 weeks each. So it's about 2 weeks of a lot of writing and then 2 weeks of not a lot. And not always for the same project. Whatever my heart is feeling that day. Writing multiple projects for me is super ideal because it allows me to work with my short attention span rather than against it. Forcing myself to work on one thing in a really steady way, long term, kind of directly opposes the way my brain works, which is like a lot and then nothing. I learned that writing multiple projects at once works so well with the way my attention span kind of ebbs and flows. The last novel that I wrote took 18 months start to finish, but I wasn't working on it every month throughout. Working on other projects is what kept me sane. You know, when I felt like I was losing energy, it's because I was deep into the project, it didn't feel like I was making progress, and so when I could just stop and work on a side project or write a short story, it would really invigorate me and just give me the boost of creative energy that I needed to get back to my novel. So for me, taking breaks to work on side projects is what energizes me for my main project. All the different projects I'm working on, they all bounce off each other, they all feed off of each other. And when I'm trying to just work on one thing long term with nothing else, I don't have anything to re-spark my creative energy. So the next piece of advice is this idea that the reader has to care about the character before they care about what happens to them, or just this general idea that intense emotional things can't happen right away. And I understand the thought behind this, and I understand why for certain people that fits into their writing philosophy and even their experience as a reader, but I don't agree with this as general advice because it's not how I read, and I'm not that special, so I can't be the only one. I care about characters immediately because they're people, and when I picked up the book, I was making the active choice to invest in whoever the book was about, and I just care inherently about them as a person, even before I know anything about them. You know, I don't need to know anything about real people to care about them. If a book opens with someone really going through a time, I don't really need a long intro to acquaint myself with the character to then care about them when they're going through it. Even from like a writing craft perspective, as a reader, I want interesting things to happen right away. I don't want long intro beats there to get me invested. To be honest, that kind of structure actually decreases my investment by trying to get me invested in the characters and their emotions and the world. But it's not providing anything interesting that's happening, and that's what's going to get me invested in the story, is interesting things happening, and people being interesting and doing interesting things. And so for me, it's counterintuitive to say, well, we need to get people invested before the things that will get them invested. I personally invest more in a character when interesting things happen right away, and I don't feel like I'm being made to like wait for it. I'm not a slow burn book kind of person. It's totally fine if you are. I know some people love books like that, and again, that's why this isn't universally bad advice, because it certainly works for some people. I have a short attention span, so I would prefer interesting things to happen immediately and constantly, and no need to like ration the interesting stuff. Some of my favorite books are the books that are constantly interesting, and there are interesting things happening on every single page. I love that. My short little attention span needs that. The next one is don't go to school for writing. Well, bitch, I did. And I turned out fine. I had a good time. I'm employed. Look, it is fine if you don't want to go to school for writing. You don't need to get a degree in writing to be a writer, but literally just stop shitting on creative writing students because it's what they wanted to do. People who are like, don't get a degree in writing, you're throwing your money away, it's a waste of time, blah, 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 blah. Like, I get tons of comments about this on my video that I did on writing degrees, where I talk about why it wasn't a waste of time for me, that where I learned a ton and it progressed me in my career, and people will still leave comments like, you're just wasting your money, like don't do it, and leave like long rants about why it's bad. Again, you don't have to do it. No one is forcing you to. You weren't there. You aren't me. Why are you making that judgment for me and for everyone else? The number of times that I've seen people shit on creative writing degrees or creative writing students, but then they hate their jobs, make it make sense. People will talk about the elitism of creative writing degrees when they've never been there, and so it's like, Where are you getting this? People act like the instant you walk into a creative writing class, the professor will shoot you in the eye if you so much as whisper that you like fantasy. And yes, there are writing profs who are elitist. There are writing profs who look down on certain genres, but they're bad profs. I think they have pretty outdated mindsets that are being phased out, and they're not representative or indicative of every writing prof and every writing program. It's the lack of teaching genre that a lot of people seem to take issue with, because they think that, you know, profs just want to suck the fun away and they want to make you just write posh, boring, pretentious bullshit. Why is there so much focus on what you're allowed to write in a creative writing class and not the more important question, are you becoming a better writer? I want to leave this place a better writer. I don't want to leave this place having had fun. I could have done that on my own. Sometimes that meant writing things that maybe I didn't want to write. Maybe they were out of my comfort zone or outside my preferences, but at the end of the day, I learned and I improved. You're not paying this tuition and putting in all this time to just have fun, but to grow and improve. And that's why they get you to write certain things. Not because they hate fantasy, not because they hate fun, not because they hate creativity or innovation, but because they're creating assignments that will, at the end, teach you skills that you can then apply to literally whatever you want to write. I am going to quickly explain for all the haters out there why writing programs usually teach literary fiction, because this is a big point of contention. People who are mad and say that, you know, they're elitist because they only teach literary fiction but they don't teach genre. First of all, that's not necessarily true. Lots of profs and programs do teach genre, they allow genre, or there are specific classes you can take on genres. Learning to write literary fiction gives you all the skills you need to write any genre. It also puts all students on common ground and equal playing field in terms of grading. It means that the writing will be judged based on the craft elements and not the different students' understanding of the specific genre elements. It can actually be really hard to workshop genres that not everyone in the class is familiar with and reads, so if we were all handing in stories in whatever genre we liked, it makes it incredibly hard to workshop. And then people start workshopping the execution of the genre element and not necessarily the base craft level, and that's what you're trying to learn, is the base craft level, which you can then focus on if everyone is just writing literary fiction. Also, because it's just the most flexible genre, not constrained by any limit of genre. It can do kind of anything, so it actually gives the most creativity and freedom. It's a genre that's literally focused on craft, which is what we're trying to learn. Other genres are more specific, and at a lot of schools you can take classes on those genres. I took a great class on horror where we just focused on like the principles of horror, but those principles are pretty specific and they needed to be discussed within context of themselves, not in a general fiction writing class where we're trying to learn the base elements of fiction. That's better learned through literary fiction. It doesn't mean you have to write literary fiction for the rest of your life, but writing it now will make you better at your chosen genre. Now, I agree, genre elitism is bad, and I do think a lot of academics and academic programs need to put in work to encourage students to write whatever they want and encourage them in their chosen genre and not enforce any kind of elitism or stylistic preference on them. But a professor saying, this is what you need to write for this assignment because it will make you improve, even if it's not what you want to write forever, is actually not bad. That's what assignments are for. People in literally every program understand that they're going to have to study things that aren't their greatest passion or area of expertise. They're gonna have to take classes on topics that they're not that interested in. Once they're done, or once they get into their own specialized work or field, they can apply everything they learned into their own specific niche interest. Writing is exactly the same, but for some reason people act like writing degrees are like creatively oppressive because they give you assignments rather than just letting you do literally whatever you want, when that's how all programs work. And I'll be honest, my writing community at school was way more supportive of experimentation and creativity and writing whatever you wanted than the people that I encounter saying that writing degrees are bad because they just make you pretentious and elitist. When you say that, you're actually being the elitist one. The next piece of writing advice that I do not agree with is don't focus on prose or don't try to write pretty prose. What if you like it though? Let people write in whatever style they want. Stop crushing the joy for language. And this is the argument that I usually see. It's less important than plot or character, so it's not what you should focus on. But it's not inherently less important than plot or character. For some writers, it might actually even be the most important thing, and there's literally nothing wrong with that. Plus, language is the vehicle for character and plot, so focusing on language will make you better at communicating character and plot. I'll hear it said that readers hate pretty prose, but that's not true. Lots love it. So I do see how there are a lot of writers who are too focused on prose and then they struggle to progress. They struggle to complete work, and it's very hard to learn if you're unable to complete work because you're not gaining any experience. If focusing so much on prose is making it so that you're not able to write, then I would definitely say, try not to focus so much on language and just let it flow more naturally. And the more you just write, the more you'll learn how to write prose. And I would also definitely recommend that writers focus on clarity more than complexity. It's really important to be able to write clearly and effectively, even if you want your style to be really pretty and fancy. But there's nothing wrong with trying to write pretty prose or aspiring to write complex prose. If it's something you like and it makes you happy, then do it. It's something that I love and it's something that makes me happy and it's something that I love to read, and there's just no reason to crush that or act like it's less important. This is a craft one, so a bit less spicy. It's to foreshadow everything. I'll be honest, foreshadowing is a technique that I literally don't pay attention to. I don't think logical plot developments need to be foreshadowed, in the sense that there have been hints planted. If it's part of the natural, logical, causal chain of the plot, when that event happens, it's going to feel like an inevitable, organic evolution of the story. I don't think you need to plant hints to foreshadow that. It's already validated by the inherent logic of the plot. Now, if you have an event that's contradictory to the logic of the plot, or not validated by the logic of the plot, then I totally see why you might want to foreshadow. Foreshadowing is a really useful tool when you are setting up an event that needs to be supported by the story but isn't supported by the direction of the plot. I think it's a bit ridiculous to say that everything needs to be foreshadowed. A lot of things happen because they're just a natural evolution of the story. The next one is don't edit as you write. Very common advice, and I think that this is similar to the idea that you should, not write multiple projects at once. It doesn't work for a lot of people. I get that it doesn't work for a lot of people. Just because this is good advice for some people doesn't mean it's good advice for everyone. I personally edit as I write. When I don't edit as I write, I get really overwhelmed by the messiness of my draft. I start to lose confidence. The thought of editing the book becomes overwhelming. When I edit as I go, I'm able to keep my confidence up because I'm fixing up the book as I'm writing it. It also helps me as a discovery writer. I might change plans at a certain point, and it's nice to be able to go back and course correct. I struggled so much with abandoning drafts for a long time, and I would write drafts super fast and then they'd be a mess, and I'd be so overwhelmed by how messy they were that I would just abandon them. When I started slow drafting and editing as I wrote, I was able to maintain my confidence the entire way through, and then when I got to the end, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the prospect of editing. I still had a really clear scope of what was going on in the story, so it revolutionized my writing process. I can't imagine writing without it. I'm much better at drafting than editing. I find that if I can wrap up as much of the editing process into the drafting as possible, that's really, really beneficial for me. So point number 9 is not a single specific thing, but it's any generalization on point of view, and you'll see it all. First person is bad, third person is bad, present tense is bad, second person is bad. You'll see it all, and it drives me insane. Point of view and tense are just tools, and they can all be used well and they can all be used poorly. There is literally no reason to make general, broad claims about one or the other being bad. Just because some people do have preferences, they don't like reading first person, they don't like reading present tense, they don't like reading third person, doesn't mean those things are inherently bad, because they're not. These things exist for a reason. The second person wasn't just immaculately conceived and just appear one day out of nowhere. Tenses exist for a reason, because they serve different functions within language. So why write these things off without knowing the purpose that they might be being used for? Having this wide range of tools is what allows for innovation and creativity. There are some people who, if they had their way, every single book would be written in third person limited past tense. The fun of writing in literature is that it can be anything, and you can write anything, and you can do anything. It's actually a good thing that we have all these tools at our disposal, and we can use the ones that best suit our story, and we can keep creating new things. Books and writing would get pretty stale if we were limited to a very narrow range of tools. The first time I ever read a book in third person present tense, it was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. Before I read that book, I'd been like, why would anyone ever write in third person present tense? What does it do? I don't see the point. And that was a very close-minded thing for me to say because I hadn't actually seen what good writers could do with third-person present tense. And then I read some books in third-person present tense and I was like, oh, this can be used super well. I love it now. I love writing things in third-person present tense. So it was very close-minded of me to just write it off because I didn't see the point. So all I can say is stop. The final idea that I don't agree with is the statement that there are no original stories anymore. I completely disagree with this. I think that there will always be original stories. You know, how often do you see it said, oh, every story's already been told? That's not true. Reading something original and interesting is compelling. I don't want writers to feel like they have to resign themselves to a world where everything has already been told, so why even try to be original? Obviously, if you zoom out far enough, you get to like the 7 basic plots, but those say nothing about originality. Those are so vague that they mean nothing, basically. I don't think it's healthy or productive to write off the possibility of innovation. I think as long as we exist as humans on this earth or whatever planet we end up terraforming, because let's be honest, we messed up this one really bad, we'll still be able to tell original stories. There are still original stories being written and published. Even just among my friends, I'm amazed at the originality that they come up with. And it brings me so much joy. You know, again, there's nothing wrong with writing a more familiar story if it's the story that you feel drawn to, but I just feel like it's really discouraging to keep parroting the idea that there are no original stories anymore, so it doesn't even matter. We will always have more original stories to tell and find new interesting things to talk about and discuss, and new characters we've never seen before who offer us new interesting insights into what a person can be and what a life can be. Inaccurate and depressing to keep saying that we're out of original stories. We'll never run out of stories. So those are some common pieces of writing advice or philosophy that I don't agree with. The vibes are off, in my opinion. If you have held any of these opinions or you've even shared them, I don't hate you. I have publicly stated many of these things before because they're so commonly said that I felt like they were true. It took a long time for me to be able to step outside things that I'd been told were true about writing and what I actually believed based on my own experience. I'm continually finding new things that I have to unlearn that I had just accepted as fact because it's what I'd been told, then have to reform my own opinion. It's still constantly happening. I do want to be clear that pretty much all of these things, the reason I don't agree with them is not because I think they're universally bad, but because I think that it's unhealthy to act like it applies to everyone or every story. It's okay to write a story in third person past tense, but I think it's ridiculous to say that it's bad to write a story in first person present tense. It's okay if you don't want to go to school for writing, but I think it's ridiculous to say that no one should go to school for writing if they want to. It's okay to fast draft and not edit as you write, but it is ridiculous to say that no one should edit as they write when it does work for some people and we can't judge what works for other people, and there's also no reason to. There's literally no reason. If someone is like, yeah, I don't outline or I edit as I write or I only write on days that I feel like writing, there's zero reason to judge that person, even if those practices work for us. All of these things, I dislike them because they're stated like they're universal. They work for some people and they just don't work for everyone. And I just think it's really important to not push these generalized attitudes onto something that is inherently so specific and personal. Writing and the work we create is inherently personal. So I just don't think it's healthy to act like literally anything about writing is universal. The more we can stop judging other writers for how they write and what they write, the happier we'll be about our own work. I found for myself especially, the more that I just stopped judging what other people wanted to do, the more I felt free to write whatever I wanted and started enjoying writing so much more. If there's common writing advice that you hate and you want to complain about, we love a good complain. I want the spiciest writing takes. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video.